Ladies and gentlemen, let me reintroduce the Honourable Damien O'Connor, Minister of Agriculture, Biosecurity, Trade and Export Growth. The Minister is a passionate advocate for rural communities and the growth of free trade, has played a key role in the new free trade agreements with the UK and is already playing a key role as New Zealand business places itself back in front of world markets. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Honourable Damien O'Connor.
Kia ora, and thank you, Michael. I apologise, I get a bit distracted by these teleprompters. If you look a bit like Phil Goff and I, yes, stay away from mirrors, and it looks a bit like a mirror to me. It's a pleasure, as I said, to participate today in the United States Business Summit and to have the opportunity to speak to you about the US-New Zealand trade and economic relationship. I'd like to join the Prime Minister in thanking the organisers, especially Fran O'Sullivan, whose Fran's gone, and Michael Barnett, who I know have worked hard to pull this event together. This event is a welcome addition to the calendar and a timely opportunity to focus on a hugely important relationship. So I'd like to acknowledge Phil Goff, who's had to leave, but I'd also like to acknowledge other distinguished guests, and especially Ambassador Udall. And I look forward to having a longer conversation with you prior to our trade delegation. Also to representatives of the business community, members of Parliament, and those who have followed the summit online, or who are from the US, and especially those officials and thought leaders from the US who have given up their time to participate in the summit. Today I want to talk first about the way New Zealand's commercial links to the US are evolving. I then wanted to go wider and look at the critical role the US has to play in shaping the economic architecture of the Indo-Pacific region and some recent developments in which New Zealand has had a close involvement. Firstly, trade and economic relationship with the United States. Today, as was said, US is our third largest trading partner overall and our largest market for services. Two-way trade growth has averaged 5% per annum over the past 15 years, and bilateral trade was 18.5 billion New Zealand dollars to the year ended 2021. There you have a really positive growth story. Sitting behind that is an even more positive story about the composition of trade and the striking shift from volume to value. In high technology sectors in the US, the United States is our most important market. New Zealand's exports of computer-related services have doubled over the past 4 years. Export of computer services such as software and licensing fees account for a big part of that. Future-focused and low-carbon firms are a major contributor to our high technology exports. Not only do these companies have a low-carbon footprint, many are purpose-driven by the intergenerational value of kaitiaki, care for people and place. The New Zealand software sector's charge into the US market has been led by major New Zealand companies such as Xero, which now has a significant presence in the US. But the big players are increasingly being joined by a wider ecosystem of niche firms like Parkable, a company offering a software as a service solution that helps businesses with employee parking and mobility challenges. I hope they sell the services in New Zealand. Our next generation offering is not limited to software. The US has also become a crucial partner to New Zealand's advanced manufacturing industry. Injections of capital and technology from US partners were critical for the development of Rocket Lab, now a real force in launch and wider space services, and the company which kick-started New Zealand's lively new space industry. There's long been a close relationship between the New Zealand and US film production sectors, demonstrated in the recent productions such as Sweet Tooth and Cowboy Bebop. And, of course, there's the success of the Oscar-winning film Power of the Dog. There's also an investment story. Two American giants, Microsoft and Amazon, are planning large investments in New Zealand data centres. These investments will help to build the technological foundation on which New Zealand's high-tech sector can continue to grow. I wouldn't want to think that traditional traders are missing out on the action. New Zealand's primary sector remains a key contributor to export growth in the US. Here too, we see a striking shift from volume to value in some segments. The standout example is wine, especially, of course, Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc, a good South Island export. Wine is now New Zealand's second largest primary goods export to the US, having grown at an average rate of over 10% per annum since 2010. Our largest export to the US, beef, has held steady, averaging around $1.2 billion a year in exports over the last 5 years. But there's more to this story. New Zealand beef exporters are finding innovative ways to appeal to US consumers. In late February, Silver Fern Farms launched a certified net carbon zero beef product into the US market. This is designed to appeal to environmentally conscious US consumers who are willing to pay a premium for a product they see as aligning with their values. Volume to value has long been a focus for our primary industries, but in the 21st century, I believe we're now talking about volume to values. And by that, I mean that consumers are increasingly looking for the values with which the food and fibre is produced. Our kaitiaki, good for you, good for the planet. Māori firms are strongly positioned to take advantage of their values-driven approach. For example, Kono is a vertically integrated food and beverage company that combines traditional values of Te Ao Māori with their business model. Companies like Kono are increasingly finding that their focus on sustainability and conversation resonates in the US market. Regenerative, organic, pasture-fed, all titles that are new but are featuring in the minds of our consumers. We're seeing dynamic and cutting-edge New Zealand companies finding profitable opportunities across a range of sectors in the super competitive US market, to the point where it's hard to point to an industry where we don't have successful partnerships or potential to build on them. This will be a key message the Prime Minister and the accompanying business delegation will take on their visit to the US later in the month. The Prime Minister refreshing our relationship in the US will be crucial as we continue to deliver on our trade recovery strategy. It needs to be said, excuse me, that companies targeting the US market have some advantages in being based here in God's own. Our brand is strong. We have come through the pandemic in reasonable shape. The innovation ecosystem bringing together science, research and business gives New Zealand the flexibility and speed to respond to market demands and disruptive trends, as well as consumer and business needs in the US. And it works both ways. US innovation and investment and entrepreneurial culture are going to be crucial in boosting the productivity of the New Zealand economy and building the high-wage economy that New Zealanders want. The US, in turn, is set to benefit from the next generation of Kiwi business leaders and entrepreneurs who are increasingly looking to the US when making their decisions about where to expand and invest. And let me say that government has a role in making things happen. Beyond our investment in science and research and a fit-for-purpose business environment, we offer a flexible and responsive regulatory culture. This can be critical for some industries, such as the space industry will attest. Now, working with the US in the Indo-Pacific, let me broaden the discussion. You will know that as well as having an important bilateral relationship, New Zealand and the US have a shared history of working hand in hand on the regional trade agenda. The original TPP was the product of some New Zealand strategic craft, followed by some creative conversations that Phil Goff and his team had with US counterparts. The US ultimately chose not to stay in TPP, but the list of current bids from big economies wanting to join CPTPP is testament to the immense importance of what was achieved. The regional agenda is not just about FTAs. Over several decades, APEC has had a big positive impact on policy and regulatory practice, both at the border and behind the border. As host in 2021, we put a huge effort into re-establishing APEC's status as one of the pillars of regional trade and economic governance. And I thank the business sector for its contribution to the great results we achieved, notwithstanding the challenges of the pandemic. We worked closely with the US and others in APEC forums to help chart a course for the region's recovery from the economic crisis brought on by COVID-19. We welcomed US support for the Aotearoa Plan of Action, which will help define the agenda for APEC over the next 20 years. We particularly look forward to the United States hosting of APEC in 2023. This will be a crucial opportunity for the US to leverage its energy and ideas to drive conversations on the economic direction in the Indo-Pacific region. In the meantime, we've welcomed President Biden's move last year to launch the new Regional Trade and Economic Initiative, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. The development of this initiative has been led by Secretary Raimondo and assisted by US Trade Representative Catherine Tai. The Indo-Pacific Economic Partnership is innovative in its form. It will have a trade module within which there will be a negotiation on some traditional trade rules, but it also aims to promote cooperative partnerships across a wider agenda, including topics of high interest to New Zealand, among them supply chain resilience, infrastructure and clean energy, and decarbonisation. The US is also focused on what IPF can achieve on labour and environmental issues, an area of alignment between the Biden administration's trade policies and priorities and of our own Trade for All agenda. We've welcomed the opportunity to work with the US as a trusted partner in the early development of the IPF concept. We will want to engage more closely with business as well as other stakeholders as the negotiating agenda starts to take shape in the months ahead. The pandemic has created unprecedented disruptions to the global supply chains that were built up over decades to be least cost and just in time. Climate change presents different challenges. The Indo-Pacific Economic Framework recognises these challenges and is focused on developing a new model of cooperation that can help Indo-Pacific economies address them together. At a time when climate action is becoming more urgent than ever, it goes without saying that we welcome the opportunity to engage with some of the world's biggest economies on what we can do in partnership to bend the curve on global emissions. For our part, I expect we will end up drawing heavily on American innovation, on technologies and investment to help drive New Zealand's transition to an economy generating net zero carbon emissions. For example, in March this year, the highest number of new electric vehicles registered to drive in New Zealand were Tesla Model 3s. Rivian Utes will be next, no doubt, when available. We are confident that the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework can provide a platform for building high-standard approaches to modern economic challenges like digital trade and climate change. Let me offer a couple of concluding comments. The first is to note that New Zealand has long sought to be part of a free trade agreement involving the United States, and this naturally remains a goal for us. Alongside our efforts in the IPF process, we will continue to engage with US counterparts on that long-term vision. At the same time, it will not have escaped your notice that New Zealand firms are thriving in the US market in spite of the lack of preferential access. That says something important about the changing commercial landscape here and globally. and about the particular strengths that New Zealand firms can offer in an increasingly digital marketplace. Look, I look forward to hearing more in the course of the day about how members of this audience are doing business in and with the United States. I want to thank you very much for attending and the opportunity to say a few words. This is an exciting and challenging time ahead. It's great to be able to work with a trusted partner on those international challenges. Kia ora.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to start with a couple of whys. When I have a look at growth of trade, I think you suggested 5% year on year. And when you referred to computer-related services, you're saying doubled over the last 4 years. So my question is, why? What have we done? What has your government done to make that happen? Is it a part of diversification? Why?
If I could work out how to turn
It's
this. Is it
going.
on?
It's on.
Look, as Minister of Agriculture, I have to be a little bit careful here. The fact is that the high-tech sector has outperformed what has been a well-performing primary sector, but the innovation, the connections, the investment, and obviously there have been a few key people like Peter Beck and I guess we've got a few people in the film industry who have got good connections and built an ecosystem that has allowed people to come up with new ideas. And Kiwis are full of innovation, full of creative ideas, and I think the ecosystem here that we have as a government is trying to support through NZTE, through MFAT, offshore connections that I consistently get positive feedback about. It's been challenging in the last couple of years, but we've invested more through NZTE in having in-market research, in-market trends and feedback so that the entrepreneurs in the area of high-tech here can get out and at least make connection. I think now they'll be able to contact those people personally and further build on those relationships.
Minister, I was going to suggest that I'd call for questions. I don't have to. We're going. I have a question here from Lydia Kronaweta. It says, you say climate action is more urgent than ever. If we are truly committed to our emissions target, what will this mean for our single biggest export, beef?
I think it means an opportunity. As I referred to, Silverfern Farms has been focusing on some farmer suppliers, improving the system so that they can go into market and say this is net zero carbon beef. Big challenge, but actually we have the potential to do that across a lot of our primary sector. That is that we have pasture-based systems. Some of them are very intensive and might need to be wound back, but others have the opportunity through planting on-farm trees, building biodiversity, and actually delivering pasture-fed beef that, if not as net carbon zero, is very close to it. We have to sell the story. Taste Pure Nature was a campaign that Beef and Lamb have started to run in the west coast of the US. That is, we need to build further on that. The pasture component of meat has been identified in California for a number of years. We're at the forefront of that. We've been a little slow to pick up on those signals, but we've committed to help the meat sector if it wants to drive further down in that direction. As I said, regenerative, organic, they're all values that primary sector can embrace and sell to the market, and I think get good premiums for. So it's an opportunity.
You spoke again of values, and in your speech you referred to kaitiaki. So that's about care for people, care for place. It is important to New Zealand. What makes you think it's important to the United States?
I think if you listen to and look at the Biden administration's statements, very focused on climate change. The revolution that is occurring, from what I see here in the US in terms of e-vehicles is astounding, moving at a pace that I don't think anyone thought possible probably 5 years ago. So they're moving forward, wanting to connect with and the EU's in a similar situation, wanting to connect to a country that is committed to climate change action, that has incorporated a big part of our emissions, that is agriculture, 48%. It's a big challenge for them as well. If we can work out how to do that, to reduce emissions from livestock protein production, from food production, then that's something that they all aspire to. So sharing technology, sharing investment and ideas is the excitement of the new future.
Continuing on the beef story here, I have a question from Dale. Does net zero beef include downsizing livestock numbers?
Not necessarily. I think there are many, Kiwi farmers are very, very innovative. Take sheep. We have half the number of sheep that we have, that we had in the 80s, and we have the same level of meat production. So the potential for us to drive forward with innovation across the farming sector is unlimited, in my view. There'll be some challenges, but I think that we can, in all areas, sheep, meat, beef, and in dairy in particular, we can show that we're the lowest emitting producers of high quality livestock protein in the world, and that's a brand that we should be proud of.
I want to refer to IPEF, all these acronyms that you guys come up with. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. And you spoke of, I think, the framework looking at economic and security issues, but you also referred to the wider issues of supply chain, energy, and decarbonisation. Can I get you to elaborate on some of that?
Look, it was a small group initially, Japan, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, discussing this as a concept. It was very clear the US didn't intend this to be a trade agreement, but it had 4 pillars there, the ones you referred to. All areas that we acknowledge are important. Supply chains, for example, a new awareness that the just-in-time and interdependence create some challenges, and so we all agree that we'd move forward to try and resolve some of these issues. What we did get was feedback that we needed a wider set of countries to be and economies to be involved, and the ASEAN ones in particular. They all have a slightly different perspective on what we need to do in these areas. But there is a view within IPEF that we now need to move out, talk with other, and indeed that's what we're doing, countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia. So it's an agreement. We're not quite sure exactly what it will mean, but we're committed to drive this forward as a way of offering better security in all those areas we talk about. So we welcome the initiative. We've been enthusiastic about supporting, about connecting with other economies and encouraging them to be part of it as well.
And Stephen Jacoby asks, how have your counterparts in the region reacted to IPEF?
Look, the initial 4 of us were enthusiastic for the reasons I've just stated. Others, as I say, through the ASEAN areas, were looking for some opportunity or some advantage. It's a fair question. What's in it for us? And so, we've been working with them to get them to understand the geostrategic advantages and make sure that they don't just want this to be a trade deal, but actually want this to be a coordination around the issues of decarbonisation and infrastructure. We need a collective view as to how we share knowledge, how we share capital and people as we go forward. So the reaction has been generally positive, but some countries have been asking, where's the advantage for us? We've got to develop that, and there's a lot of work to be done.
You spoke of investment, and you referred to the American giants of Amazon and Microsoft coming to New Zealand. How do you intend leveraging off that?
Obviously, we have to learn from them, and Amazon might not have quite the amount of money. I think there's been a little bit of a glitch. Look, these are big players in the international arena, and we have to, when they come in here, we have to look at the opportunities that they can create through their systems, through their networking, and I think the connection is one that we have to build on back into the US market. and they might then have exposure to some of the, I guess, the products that we can provide into their supply chain. That's the huge opportunity, I think.
I have a question here. It's from Frederick Standish, and it's gone. There you go. Thank you for doing that to me. On IPEF, I have a question now. The framework is currently vague. How can New Zealand companies participate in the development of IPEF? How can New Zealand companies?
That's very observant of them. It is vague, and I think it's based on high-level principles of engagement. We will be reaching out to businesses, to stakeholders, as this thing rolls forward. I think we were looking for a commitment to launch this as a concept, and people may think, well, what's the value in that? Look, I think working with the US, working with Australia and Japan in any of these areas is invaluable at a time of tension. We are like-minded in terms of our democratic principles on what we want to achieve for our people. So we have to work together. And yes, it is a little vague, but those things will be shared with the business sector and stakeholders as they roll forward. This is not some kind of secret deal. This is an open agreement of like-minded or an open commitment to work with like-minded partners for the improvement of the greater world. And, we need to, indeed, if you look at the recent report out today around climate change, sea level rise, we have to share every bit of technology that we can. And the trade agreement with the UK and with the EU include environment chapters where we will lower the barriers to the movement of goods and services and knowledge when it comes to areas of climate change and environmental improvement. So we can't harbour that knowledge and those goods in the hope that we get some short-term commercial advantage if indeed the wider world needs those. So this is what it's about. And New Zealand, in my opinion, trying to be the best country for the world, that is trying to lead when we can, share when we can, understand whenever possible.
Is IPEF, from a business perspective, should business look at it as a counter to the strength of China in this region, or is it, what's the purpose of IPEF?
No, I think it will offer security moving forward to make sure that infrastructure is robust, that supply chains are resilient and can be relied upon. And so clearly we have a reliance on one big market. Anyone in any business that has such a reliance on one customer, needs to look at alternative options. And I guess it's making sure that in terms of infrastructure and emissions reduction, we're doing our best. We're not being, I guess, tied into limited options because of trading structures.
I'm going back to the question that we have from Frederick Standish. The person is online. David Suzuki, climate crisis expert. He spoke to our fast response to major world problems, and the plan is slow for climate. Any thoughts on this changing?
James Shaw will release our plan for emissions reduction shortly, as the Prime Minister said. It's far-reaching in areas of agriculture, pushes the boundaries. We're working with the sector leaders to do things they didn't think, some don't think necessary, but actually that's the farmers on the ground. But actually, slowly, as I say, the report that came out this morning around sea level rise is one more clear indicator that urgency is required in these areas. And I think if you, say, refer to the US e-vehicle industry, it is ramping up rapidly. There's a note gone from Tesco's, one of the biggest retail suppliers in the world, to its suppliers to move to renewable energy now. That is, that they are expecting all their suppliers to move to energy, to know their carbon footprint and to have a plan to reduce it. These are the kinds of things that are happening across the corporate world, and they eventually will come back and affect us. But in terms of the global action, I think COP27 I think there'll be a new sense of urgency at that forum this year.
Now, do I have any questions out here? Anybody who isn't holding technology and can't send me a message? Are there any questions out there? No. Question here from Anonymous. What's your trade module for the supply chain resilience and delivery of decarbonisation?
Trade module.
I think we should wait until we hear the Canterbury airport, the Christchurch airport story this afternoon, but...
Look at all the things we talk about here, and I guess the discussion through IPEF will be an interesting exercise of how we deliver on what are aspirational targets across major economies. And we know that we need these things in place if we're to have some security for business. Doing it is not easy. These are huge amounts of capital, a lot of geopolitical kind of pressures. We just have to keep working at it. And I think as a government, we're committed to work with any partner that shares our aspirations for a better future. And the US, in all its indications and statements, is in the same space. And we welcome the opportunity through IPEF.
I have a question here from Michael Fox. Should the government do more in a policy sense to further support exporters already responding to challenges like sustainability to incentivise further change?
I think there's been the GIDI Fund, decarbonising industrial energy sources is a good way that we have been doing this. I spoke briefly before about NZTE, more money in market to answer questions that anyone thinking of exporting or early on stages of exporting or even some of the big players. We're doing as much as we can. Obviously there are some fiscal constraints, and obviously we can't charge off without getting feedback from industry, and I think the world has changed and the way we operate has changed quite quickly. The digital platform that NZT is providing, the options to get into that and utilise it, are the little things that we hope are helping exporters. But, if people have strong views on where we could do better, then by all means, we don't subsidise. That's something that we're trying to keep out of. It makes it a little easier at the World Trade Organization. One of the big challenges we do have in MC12, we hope takes place in June, is to ensure that the WTO is relevant and continues to improve, not step back. And I would like to see the US step up and endorse and support the WTO more. It is an essential organisation for multilateral trade rules. We rely on those to trade, and we'll rely on them more so as we move into the future. We've already seen its value through disputes where we've had adjustments made in market to help our exporters, but ensuring that the WTO is a strong, relevant organisation is important, and the US can play a leading role in underpinning that.
Minister, when I have a look at the 2 years of COVID and our economic results, you'd have to say that our exporters have done well for New Zealand. When you look at the numbers that you gave me at the start of your presentation, 5% growth year on year for the United States, I guess the question becomes, what is it that the government is going to do to try and accelerate that? What are we going to do to build that export story so that we continue the success that we've had in the past?
I'm guessing, but we haven't done detailed analysis, but trusted relationships has endured. They have supported the ongoing growth of exports from our country at a time of so much uncertainty and potential disruption. Those trusted relationships have held firm. Building on those further through personal connections, I think the ability to travel once again should lift that export growth. Kiwis, sometimes we're a bit too nice, I think. Not always, but and sometimes we're not confident enough, unlike our Australian mates. But I think it works for us generally out across the market. We have to be a little more confident as we go forward to build on the success that we have achieved through managing COVID. That care for people really does resonate with our international partners around the world, and the ones who are willing to pay more to move from volume to values. And if I look at, I guess the decisions around purchase by my daughters, the new generation, they do look for different things. It's not just cost and value, it's around the values. You know, is this good for me? Is this good for the planet? The carbon, you know, the measurement, the Allbirds kind of proposition around reducing the carbon footprint of a pair of shoes at every single step. They believe that, and it seems to have driven their success so far. And I think, you know, carbon will be a measure into the future of the value of a product. And so those are the values of protecting our planet for future generations that we've got to connect to. And I think our ancestors have done a great job to get us to where we are. It's now our responsibility to take us to where we need to be. And I think that's in a lower carbon world of high value animal protein, but one where animal welfare standards, labour standards, all of those things are the best they can possibly be.
A wonderful message for us to finish on. However, I thought I might finish on a slightly lighter note. So as many of you probably appreciate, from a chamber perspective, for some of the people that we had working on this project, they stayed in the hotel last night, so they were here to meet and greet this morning. One of our young people that was staying here has the same surname as you, Minister. And she wanted me to thank you for the macaroons and the wine that got sent to her room.
Excellent. It did take a while for me to check in. I was wondering what was going on. So there's just one of us in each room, that's to be sure.
No, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking the Minister for his presentation this morning. Thank you.